Over the years, there have been many 2D games that have transitioned into 3D. Super Mario, Sonic, Metal Gear, Metroid. Many of these franchises were changed to 3D out of necessity in a changing industry. However, the games I'm going to be talking about today, the creators essentially decided, screw it, let's try it. First of all, let's start with a brief history of Risk of Rain. Risk of Rain is a 2D pixel art side-scroller roguelite, released in 2013 and made by two college students who went under the name of Hopoo Games. The game was a hit and accrued a die-hard fan base. After a lot of success and a cult following with their first title, 4 years later in 2017, Risk of Rain 2 was first conceptualized. At first, they wanted to go with a 2D approach again, but with the player in control of the monsters from the first game. In the game, players would accumulate items as they played. In fan art, people liked to depict the characters with all the items they had gathered strewn across their body. Hopoo had taken a particular liking to this. They really wanted to use it for the sequel. 2D pixel art was difficult to implement this with, as there would have to be a sprite sheet for every single item and combination thereof. And it didn't give them very much space to work with either, as visually the characters were comparatively small to the world. So, they transitioned their prototype from 2D to 2.5D. This definition of 2.5D was essentially 3D models used in a 2D setting. This didn't quite work to their satisfaction, and they decided to go ahead and experiment with full 3D instead. They were very pleased with the prototype, noting that the 3D option provided much deeper design spaces and more possibility for cool gameplay. Then in 2019, the game was released onto early access and fully released in 2020. The game featured gameplay fully redesigned for 3D environments and was all rendered in the Unity engine. Now that that little history lesson is over, it's time to get onto the meat of the game and how they redesigned their game for 3D and made it into a hit. One of the key aspects of Risk of Rain's 2 successful transition is the fact that they didn't really change much of the core gameplay loop at all. And the nice part is that you can pick up either game first and start playing the other, and you'll have a good idea of what you're supposed to be doing. In both games, players will kill monsters, buy items, activate the teleporter, and move on to the next stage. These games focus on the player becoming more powerful by gathering items on stages and infinitely progressing to new stages until they either die or complete the game. In these games, difficulty equals time, so it pushes the player to make difficult decisions often and keeps the player on edge. The game devolves into chaos as time goes on, and Risk of Rain 2 does a great job at instilling this chaos in a 3D space. Next, we'll talk about characters. Many of the characters from the first title make a return to the second. They've all been tweaked to better move around in a 3D environment. In the first game, there isn't much emphasis on movement skills, since traversal is much simpler in a 2D environment, and instead focuses on careful timing and combat. Whereas in the sequel, every character has some way to get around the map much faster, and overall has a strong emphasis on exploration and movement. Hopoo did a great job of preserving the characters' identities both visually and mechanically, keeping all the skills relatively similar to the original. Sprint was also added to all characters to make ordinary movement feel faster in these larger, more imposing environments. Lastly, I want to talk about items. There are a huge amount of items in both iterations of Risk of Rain, well over 100 in each game in fact. A lot of the items from the first game made it into the second, and a good number were kept the same, perhaps tweaked a bit in the stats department. Others were tweaked to better suit a 3D environment instead. A majority of the items in the first game were on-hit effects, which were fun, but only functioned well in sessions that were longer due to the mass variety of them. In Risk of Rain 2, the item system was rebalanced to favor more stat-increasing items and less on-hit items to give opportunities for stronger effects and players. This also gave Hopoo the opportunity to fine-tune their item system and rework stats and remove items that were just too good from the first game. Another thing I mentioned earlier is that Hopoo really wanted to have all the items collected displayed on the characters as you played, and they delivered. Every single character has a unique item placement for each item that you can possibly collect. That just about wraps up my thoughts on Risk of Rain's transition into 3D. I hope you learned something new. I know I certainly did. Thanks for watching.